Guruji, you are the host now?
I am. Some technical issue must have happened because of which Arvinder got disconnected.
Okay, नहीं मतलब हर पास ही हुई because I also got disconnected. So I had message आया सीगा कि meeting ended by the host. So
नहीं मेनू भी आया सीगा. So
okay.
I have relogged in. So it'll be all right just now.
And that should be fine. That should be fine. मेरा audio video तो clear है ना? Since I'm going to do some of the talking today.
Yeah, absolutely clear.
Okay. क्योंकि साडा जो नेट ना थोड़ा erratic सीगा सवेर दा. So that's why I was a little concerned कि ते उड़ी ना जाए. Otherwise I'll use my phone's hotspot.
Right now it's fine.
Okay.
Let me just check with Arvinder. Yeah.
ये कैसे चल रहा है?
मेरे फोन.
सत श्री अकाल गिल सर, मेरी आवाज आ रही?
सत श्री अकाल जी, loud and clear. So just to get.
हाँ जी, इलेक्ट्रिशियन में भेज देता, तड़ को 2 मिनट चाह रहे हैं.
Thank you, fantastic. So just to get the practicals out of the way, Parvinder has been made Facebook host by Facebook admin by Nazi, and we will make him host.
All right, ठीक है.
So he'll be able to connect.
Yes. Perfect. Preeti ji, good evening.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, Preeti ji. Tusi sunao, how are you?
All okay. Just tired out. अभी पहुंचे ना दोपहर.
I know. Good Pratap, there is Sukhish.
हाँ जी.
Shall I admit?
हाँ जी, बिल्कुल. She is one of the poets.
Okay.
So,
Arvinder,
you are host now.
Okay.
I'll join from the other room on my phone. So Preeti is using my my laptop.
No problem. I'll make Parvinder co-host.
Yeah. Parvinder and मैं कर देता.
I'll do that, and electrician तड़को ना 1 मिनट से पहुंच जाना उन्हें.
All right, thank you so much, Arvinder. Fantastic.
नहीं.
But if I'm on your phone, then how will it work?
That's fine.
Huh?
That's fine. You won't have to sit in here.
You say so.
Or Gil sir, the people are still joining in. case Preeti ji, you find it difficult, light the problem nahi theek hoye na, I'll ask Mona to come and pick you up, guys, and then you can stay there.
No. I only have to do the introduction, so that's okay.
No. I'm just talking about if electricity.
If problem हो गई.
मैं सिर्फ वो drawing room के problem है Arvinder.
Here it's working. I'm sitting in the bedroom. It's working here.
Okay.
Manish.
सत श्री अकाल सर.
ओ सत श्री अकाल.
मनीष परविंदर ने कहा कि ज्वाइन कर जाए, उन्होंने अरविंदर होस्ट को-होस्ट बना देंगे.
जी सर, मैं उन्हें कह रहा हूं.
Sukhish, I believe, is Lily Swarn. And there's Kashiana.
Yes.
Hello.
Good
Hey,
morning,
can
Kashiana.
you hear me?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
can,
of
we
course.
can.
Okay, good to see you all.
Yeah.
Hi, Kashiana. How are you?
Hey, Preeti, good to see you.
Good
Finally.
to see you too. Yeah.
Good evening,
You look like
Kashiana,
sisters.
from Canada.
Who's looking like sisters?
You and Kashiana.
Really?
All right, that's a compliment.
I don't mind that at
So
all.
I said that's a compliment. I'll take
Yeah,
it.
I don't mind that. Yeah, that's not so bad at all, is it? It's a
Not
good
at
thing.
all.
Yeah.
We are
So
all
looking-
sisters, right? So
Yeah, the
in spirit.
sisterhood. You saw that Sisterhood of Swans? Did you read that?
Yeah, correct. Yes.
Yeah. And who's here? Sukesh?
Sakun,
I see Sakun
Sakun is here.
Sorry?
Sakun is here, and
Okay.
Lily Swarn is here.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, good evening. I hope it's good evening wherever you are. You are in Uttar
Yes, it
Pradesh.
is. Good evening, good Pratap. Thank you.
You are in Uttar Pradesh.
No, I'm in Chandigarh. Actually, I don't know what what
You know,
it's showing
the
up.
sign behind you says MIT University, Uttar Pradesh.
Yeah, I don't know how to take off that thing. I'm really bad at it, but
So that's
it's
why I
from a
thought.
previous Zoom.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, I don't have much to do with Amity. Hello, Kashiana. I can see
Hey,
Preeti.
Lily.
Hey,
Hi, how are you?
oh, lovely you look, Kashiana. Where are you in cool
Lovely you all
climes?
look.
Okay.
So Gayatri is also here. Good evening, Gayatri.
Hi, good evening.
Hey,
Hello.
Gayatri.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Kashina.
Hi,
Looking
Gayatri. Good
gorgeous.
evening.
Hi, good
And
Hi,
evening.
Sukesh, good
Gayatri.
evening. Good evening and
Hi,
good morning from
Lily.
Canada.
Hello.
Morning.
Morning.
How are you,
Sakun
Lily?
is not, I don't think Sakun is able to connect.
Hmm?
It's showing connecting to audio.
Yeah, connecting to audio.
Are we going to be on?
Live,
Are
just
we going to do Facebook Live, guys?
Yeah, we are. We are.
Yes.
Good Pratap, anybody
mother
left?
is
Like
feeling better now.
Good Pratap, anybody left in the list?
Yeah, we are
Okay.
missing
Kashiana.
Bhaswati.
Okay,
Bhaswati.
she's joined. She has joined now. Okay. Great.
How do you pronounce her name? Bhaswati
Bhaswati.
Bhashwati.
or Bhaswati?
Bhaswati.
Bhaswati. Okay.
We can ask her as well, but that's what I
Ugo, you
think.
can just close that door then or what?
Better still.
This one.
Right. हाँ.
Something seems to be wrong with Sakun's network, I think.
मुझे अपना phone
Mhm.
को दे दो.
It is still
Uh,
connecting to audio.
It doesn't matter. At times it takes time.
Okay.
Yeah.
There
Has
we have.
Palvinder joined? Has Palvinder joined?
No, not yet, Preeti ji.
Okay.
Good evening,
Bhaswati,
good evening, Bhaswati.
please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, of
Yes.
course.
Yeah.
Morning.
Hi.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm sorry, it's early morning here in Canada.
Bhaswati is in Canada as well, I think, right? Yeah.
Wow, wonderful. So we are from the same time zone. I'm in Edmonton at the moment.
Yeah, I am in Ontario.
Okay. So great.
So
Is
we really
Anya-
have an international bunch
Yeah.
of poets
Panel.
here with us today.
Panel and yeah, poets. Chamak sahab bhi to poet
Poets,
ही हैं.
that's what I said.
Chamak sahab bhi poet हैं.
हाँ, वो भी हैं, बिल्कुल.
हाँ.
बिल्कुल.
Hey, Bhaswati, we were wondering, am I pronouncing your name right, Bhaswati?
That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
And how do you say your name? Is it
Kashi.
Kashi?
Mine? Just
Yes.
how it's spelled, Kashiana.
Kashiana.
Kashiana with a K.
It doesn't really matter how we pronounce it. नाम वाम में क्या रखा है?
हसीन नामों वाले लोग आए आज, है ना?
Ah. Good. Manish, please, can you
कोई
do me a
आएगा
favor?
तो जिंदल.
Yeah. Can you please ask Palvinder to join? I cannot
think-
see him
हाँ.
in the meeting
You, Manish, please tell Palvinder to join.
and
ਸਰ ਉਹ ਕਹਿ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਮੈਨੂੰ accept ਕਰ ਲਿਆ ਮੈਂ join ਕਰ ਲਿਆ.
Sound is
नहीं,
not on sound.
He's not there yet.
Sahil, Maninder,
मैं
Swati.
ਸਰ ਮੈਂ ਹੁਣੇ ਕਾਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਮੈਂ join ਕਰ ਲਿਆ.
But बिल्कुल कोई ना ही नहीं गा जिन्होंने join किया होवे.
सर मैं दोबारा कॉल कर देना।
We need to understand ना कि किसी और आईडी तो ज्वाइन तो नहीं कर रहे हो।
Manish तेरे पूछना पड़ेगा what ID he is using.
Manish is on the call, I think. I said.
Okay. Sir, do you see any Monica there?
Just a moment. Preeti ji, you need to call up to join again because she's not able to connect. Gupta, can you do that favor? Ask Amrita to, tell her.
Who? Tell who?
Ask who?
Sukoon Singh, she's not able to connect to audio. I think she has to change her position or she has to go to a different room because her internet seems to be little.
I'll send her a message. I'll just send her a message.
Yeah. And we don't have you asked
Monica. Yeah.
No, it's Arundhati, Maninder, Sahil, Deepshikha, Yashvi, Rana.
Okay.
We have wonderful.
You know, Monica is my sister and she is in North Carolina where Kashiana is also based now. And they even spoke to each other.
Yeah.
A couple of days back. Yeah. So I asked her if she would
That's
join
how
today.
the community starts expanding, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
No.
We heard Bhashwati, Gayatri, we are all good, right? You guys are good with our audio?
Yeah, your audio.
Yeah, I think the network is fine. The audio and videos are stable. I was a little concerned about mine.
Is even
Yeah,
the
you
best
are.
one.
You are, Gayatri.
हेलो चमक सर मैं
hello.
प्रविंदर ਨੂੰ ਰੀਸੈਂਡ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਲਿੰਕ ਉਹ ਜੁਆਇਨ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਜੀ
केडी आईडी तो ज्वाइन करेगा मनीष
सर प्रविंदर भाटिया
Okay, right. Okay. No, I'm going to admit all now because or I can wait for another 1 minute because it's going to be 6 now.
Yeah, एक मिनट रुक जाओ. Let's Sakoon also join.
Yeah. She's joined now. We cannot see her.
Yeah,
I can see her. Sakoon, please unmute yourself.
Hello.
there she is. Finally.
There you are.
Hey, Sakoon.
Hi, Katyana. How are
We
you?
finally meet. We are good. I hope your
Yes.
mom's doing better.
She's better now. Yes.
Okay, that's good.
I had my fingers crossed, and the day was good.
All our wishes.
Good evening.
Sakoon ji, I'm so happy that you could join because I really liked your poems. They were very nice, very nice.
Thank you so much. Look forward.
So since everyone is here now, I think we can start. It's 5:58 already, 5:59.
You can let people in anyway.
No, Preeti ji, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to say to Palvinder. Palvinder, please unmute yourself. Palvinder, can you please turn on your camera? Palvinder ji. Palvinder. Palvinder, can you hear me? Munish.
हेलो
Munish ji, please, Palvinder nu kaho ke Facebook ID login kar den because he is not answering my request.
ओके सर
Okay. Yes, Preeti ji, from my side, it's all set to go. Except Palvinder is connecting it to the Facebook. इतनी खामोशी क्यों हो गई?
I think we are just waiting for you to give us the go ahead.
No, I said, Preeti said it's all good to go.
क्या शुरू करें?
देखिए प्रभु का नाम।
Has done the Facebook, or should we just leave it for now?
वैसे कितनी खूबसूरत सी बात है कि खामोशियां भी बोलती हैं.
It goes right with the topic of the day, right? We're all in the space of observation.
Absolutely. And you know, I'm not the part of the today's conversation or today's part of the poetry, but let me say कि वो चंद लम्हे खामोशियों के चमक और दास्ताने हिजर बयां हुई. The whole of the journey of the life was discussed in those few moments of the silence.
ਚਮਕ ਸਰ
जी.
ਸਰ ਪ੍ਰਵਿੰਦਰ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਆ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਬਟ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਨਹੀਂ ਉਹਦੀ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਨਹੀਂ ਆ ਰਹੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ
ਉਹਨਾਂ
ਉਹਨੂੰ
को Facebook कनेक्ट कर देन. आवाज कोई नहीं सी दोबारा सुन लांगे ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ.
ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਜੀ ਓਕੇ
Palvinder, please unmute yourself. You need to tap. Yeah, you need to tap the left icon. Yes. Now say something.
Is someone called Prahlad Rai Agarwal who's raising his hand already?
No, I think probably that's by mistake. I'll do it. Don't worry.
Should we begin then?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I think we'll just start and Palvinder can connect
Yeah.
with Facebook.
Oh, there he is.
Please give us the go ahead once you've connected, Palvinder.
Palvinder, it will show that the page is incorrect. Anyways, just go ahead.
Okay, sir. You start, sir.
Okay,
You start.
great. Yeah. So Preeti ji, please go ahead. Okay.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a very special session of poetry, where we have with us 5 poets: Kashyana Singh, Bhashwati Ghosh, Lili Swarn, Sakun Singh, and Gayatri Chawla. And what we are going to do today is to discuss the role of the poet as witness. This is a title that really resonates with me because I've always felt that poets and writers are collectors of worlds, of stories, of words and images. And their vocabularies are rich, resplendent, multi-layered, imaginative. And even if poetry has not saved anyone, it definitely preserves human voices and human experiences. It chronicles the present, it dredges the distant past, and through their magical words and images, poets can perhaps help us to see ourselves more clearly. We can also, I think, perceive what is precious and what is endangered. And so I definitely do charge poets with responsibility, with a capital R. To bear witness, to chronicle, to reveal, I think that's important because history remembers what is sung by poets. With these thoughts, I'm going to leave you with Kulpratap, who's going to carry on talking to the poets, discussing these issues with them, and also we listen to a lot of readings as well. But before that, let me just give you a short introduction to each of the poets who's here with us today. Gayatri Chawla is an award-winning poet, translator, and French teacher from Mumbai. Her poems are featured in the anthology Modern English Poetry by Younger Indians, published by Sahitya Academy, Yearbook of Indian Poetry in English, and the Kali Project. She is the author of 2 poetry collections, Invisible Eye and The Empress. Lili Swarn is an internationally acclaimed multilingual poet and author, and her work can be read in numerous international anthologies and magazines. Lili's poetry has been translated into over 17 languages. Her Urdu ghazals are put to music, and she's been awarded the Women of Arts Award 2020-21. and also Best Indian Author Award 2021 for her book History on My Plate. She's working on her book of Urdu ghazals and Punjabi nazms. Her books include The Gypsy Trail, Lilies of the Valley, and History on My Plate. Bhashwati Ghosh writes and translates fiction, non-fiction, and poetry. Her first book of fiction is Victory Colony, 1950. Her first work of translation from Bengali into English is My Days with Ramkinkar Page. Bhashwati's writing has appeared in several literary journals, including Literary Shanghai, HELD, Cargo Literary, Pithead Chapel, Warscapes, The Maynard, as well as Indian Express, Scroll, The Wire, Dhaka Tribune. Bhashwati lives in Ontario, Canada, and is currently working on a non-fiction book on New Delhi. Sakun Singh has been a recipient of the Fulbright Fellowship, and she currently teaches Indian literature and cultural studies in Chandigarh. She's published her academic writings extensively. And her novel, In the Land of Lovers, I think was released just about a year or so back. Kashiana Singh calls herself a work practitioner and embodies the essence of her TEDx talks, work as worship, and she uses this in her everyday. Her chapbook, Crushed Anthills from Yavanika Press in 2020 is a journey that unravels memory through 10 cities. She proudly serves as a managing editor for Poets Reading the News, and her voice can be heard on various international platforms. Her first poetry collection is called Shelling Peanuts and Stringing Words. Her newest full-length collection, Woman by the Door, has just been released. She lives in North Carolina and carries her various geopolitical homes within her poetry. With that, as you can see, some lights have gone off in the room. We are having a lot of trouble because we've just landed in Amritsar after almost a month in Delhi, and the house is playing up. There's no light, and also the internet is playing up. But I'm going to hand over to Gurpratap. Gurpratap is a part of the Majha House team, very valued member, also a poet and writer in his own right. He's been published earlier, and his new novel is coming out from Speaking Tiger. We're hoping it's going to be this very year. So over to you, Gurpratap.
Thank you, Preeti. Thank you. And before I begin, there are two things that I would like to say. That I'm simply thrilled that I am a part of this program and got to play the role of the moderator in this program, because when I received the poems from all the five poets, I was simply floored. They are brilliant, brilliant poems. Very affecting, very moving, very emotional, very personal, and very universal also. So I'm delighted, simply delighted. And like Preeti said, that a poet is also witness and poetry is also witness. So I remember a quote in Hindi that goes something like, "Jahan na jaye Ravi, wahan jaye Kavi." So wherever the sun does not go, even the poet goes even there. And I welcome all of you to this session, which promises to be a wonderful session. We will have some in-depth insights from the poets about the process of writing poems. We'll have readings of their wonderful poems. And before we begin, I would like to invite Kashiana to do a brief intro of the session, why you chose this particular title, Poetry as Witness.
Sure. Thank you, Gurpratap, and Preeti, thank you. And before I jump into Poetry as Witness, on behalf of all of us who are here today, a big thank you, Preeti, to you and your team for allowing this space, and allowing the space both for the team as well as for all of us to come to the table and have a meaningful dialogue. So appreciate that. And you are the light in the room, Preeti. You don't need light around you. But let's jump to Poetry as Witness and why the theme. I'll just share my thoughts, and I'm sure through the discussion we'll hear everybody else. I loved what Preeti said, which is history remembers what is sung by poets. That's absolutely kind of a good phrase to summarize Poetry as Witness. And before I share my thoughts, I think we just need to acknowledge that this term, Poetry as Witness, the mother of this term, so to say, is a poet called Caroline Forche, who started her immensely intense journey and landed into this space of formalizing poetry as witness. It always has been witness, but formalizing poetry as witness after her time in El Salvador and watching and living the conditions there, both politically and socially. So the story of her anthology, Poetry as Witness, or Poetry is Witness, is there for everybody to read for themselves. So I won't go into that. But to me, witness is really about remembrance, right? And when I say remembrance, I mean remembering the current, the past, but sometimes the future also. Like Preeti said, we are not going to be able to fix things. Maybe we can, or fix the world, or solve for problems of universal hunger. But we as poets have the responsibility and the ability to open spaces, and spaces that allow for contradictions, right? For juxtapositions. We'll hear Bhaswati's poem, for sunrise and sunset to be there, for the dark and light to be present. And that's really what our role as poets of witness turns to be. The other thing is, witness can be cathartic, or it could be motivational, or maybe just a documentary of focusing on bringing language into a space that allows us to focus on the gray, because all other sources like news articles and reporting and even music to some extent need the black and white, need a closure. And poetry doesn't need the closure, right? You can operate in the space of the gray, which allows it to be a tool of witness very effectively, way more effectively than sometimes other sources of art maybe. The last thing I'll say is, we all have heard the news of the latest, the 24th Poet Laureate of United States, Ada Limon, was appointed, and she writes with great simplicity, but is a strong observer of everything around her. She writes about birds and trees and things around her, just like a lot of poets from our Indian subcontinent do. But she's probably also the greatest poet of witness, because she connects that to the universal and then brings out things that are about fear, right? That are about remembrance or of lament or creativity through that poetry. So in a nutshell, that's what I would say, Gurpratap. And obviously every one of us, which is why this panel is unique, comes to the table with a different style and a different approach to what witness is. And I'm sure we'll hear more of that as we start jumping into reading some of our poems. So back to you, Gurpratap, if you're still on. You seem to have frozen for me.
Yeah, Gurpratap, can you please carry on?
I think we lost him.
Gurpratap is having some problem. You can start with
So maybe what we can do, Preeti, if we have your permission, while we wait for Gurpratap to come in, maybe we start. I think he's back.
Well, I'm already here. Something is wrong with my internet also. It has been very erratic since morning, and I just went off. So thank you so much, Kashiana. And we'll set the ball rolling now. And I would like to begin with a question for all of you. Let's discuss the title of the session, Poetry as Witness. How do each of you see poetry as witness? And to what is it witness? Is it an emotional experience, a social occurrence, or some common phenomena? We can start with Lily, I think. Lily?
Thank you, Gurpratap. First of all, thank you to Majha House, to Preeti. I've been following you all for forever, and I'm so honored to be here and to see some of my favorite poets say, Gurpratap, thank you, Preeti. So I think for me personally, poetry as witness is both. It is telling the world in an emotional manner, the poet, how he's seeing the social, whatever it he's witnessing. So while I was growing up, I would say it's something like a folk song, Doli Chardiya Mariya Heer Ji Ka. It brings to you so vividly the whole history, which we were witness to, how, he went through that, her emotional trauma through this. Then when I would listen to the Taddi Jathas in the Gurdwara, when I was very young, I lived next to historical Gurdwara, Sector 8, Chandigarh. So they used to have these Taddi Sahibs who would come and they would sing about the valor of Guru Gobind Singh's Fauj. And they would go like, Sina ho gaya shek ko shek, pa gaye shale, pa gaye shale. For me, that was poetry as witness, and also the vowels. So I think that when I started writing, I didn't understand that for me it was cathartic, but actually I was also voicing what I was seeing around me. I write nature poetry a lot. I wrote influenced by the liberation movement of women. So for me, it's both an emotional as well as, how our mental landscape is also showing us what we are witnessing. So we have kind of, made it our own, and then we've added a bit of our own, and that's how we see it. That's what I feel, good Pratap.
Thank you, thank you. And that was so unexpected and brilliant.
The Taddy. Okay. I so love them.
Gayatri?
Hi, Guru Pratap, and
Hi.
thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here today for speaking on this such an intriguing theme, poetry as witness. I think, I've grown up listening to a lot of stories of like, we are basically Sindhi. So during the partition, my father, along with his ancestors, he migrated to Indian shores. So there's so many stories that I've heard. And we didn't, so much was not spoken about. Oh, we miss this place, but that feeling was felt. Sometimes it's just a feeling that you witness, you just feel it. And there was a nostalgia of a motherland which we never visited, but there was a feeling of displacement, and that kind of melancholy that existed, it seeped into, I think, my psyche, and it seeped into my writing also. Of course, so there's a lot of nostalgia. I look at it as nostalgia. I haven't personally seen the partition, but I've heard so many stories about the motherland. When you're trying to connect with, when as you grow wiser every day, you want to connect with your roots, and it's heart-wrenching when there's a home across the border and you can't visit it. So these things are there. They're feelings that you witness and then you write as poetry. That's what I feel about poetry's witness. Yes.
Thank you. Sakun, can we have your take on this?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Always wonderful to be in Majha house. Being a student of literature, I really wanted to go back to how, where exactly we start analyzing poetry as a form of writing. And somehow, first things first is always Plato, who was rather pejorative about the idea of poetry as opposed to other forms of writing. When he called poetry as being twice removed from reality, he was rather, talking about poetry in a rather pejorative sense. But when we move down to Aristotle and talks about poetry as a way of representing reality, I think that is what the modern literary theory really clasps onto or latches onto, and therein is a tradition. But the mainstream literary way or literary theoretical way, or the naysayers also factored in Plato somewhere in the 19th century when novel as a literary form was condemned, and it was said to have some kind of a negative influence on minds which could otherwise produce something worthwhile. But if they were consumed by a genre like the novel, then pretty much this whole thing about getting up and doing something to change the world is somewhere dissolved when it comes to literature and poetry. Forever, and especially in the Punjabi scenario, we've seen the kind of cynicism we have towards literature as a phenomena, as something that somebody would take up. We've experienced that. So I think that tradition, really can be traced Plato onwards. But what literary theory really latches on is the Aristotelian view of literature, which is that it is about representation. And somewhere it is about representing reality or putting down reality in a way that somewhere there is a consciousness of the writer that is involved or comes in. Because I feel that to describe poetry as witness is different, because somewhere you are making this whole phenomena passive, as opposed to representation, which is a more active way to look at poetry or literature. That was my idea, and that was the first thought that came to my mind about poetry, or to really see poetry or evolution of poetry in a passive light, where it is there somewhere on the margins and things are getting recorded of their own accord. So is it that, or is it about a consciousness actively participating in creating something out of that event, like Foshe herself calls, a trace of an event, and poetry becoming an event itself. Second thing I would want to say is that, when we talk of poetry as witness, we are in literature as metafiction, or poetry as metafiction, where we are taking attention from the theme to the genre itself. Somehow here the genre has become the character. Poetry itself has become the character. We put our focus or the spotlight on poetry itself. That what is it that poetry really does, or poetry, actually goes on to achieve. And since, I've worked on Amitav Ghosh a lot, and there was this shift that Amitav Ghosh saw from anthropology in choosing novel as a form in which he wanted to really write. And he gave up anthropology after, studying it academically for a very long time. And one of the most fundamental things he says is that what literature does is shows us predicament, human predicament, and that predicament of very real individuals in real situations. Whereas what history and other areas do is that either they put the focus on politics, or they like a field like anthropology, for instance, or sociology, for instance, would like to essentialize experience. Look at the theoretical side rather than the human side. So I think these 2 points, occurred to me, and probably, it's because we deal with literature academically that, I felt that these connections needed to be made. Thank you. Over to you, Guru Pratap.
Thank you so much. And can we unmute yourself also, Bhashwati?
Yeah. Bhashwati, yeah.
Thanks, Guru Pratap, and thanks Preeti and Majha House. I concur with all my other co-panelists in that poetry as witnesses both the seen and the felt. It can also be being witness to memories, of collected memories. But to just carry on from where Sapun left, in my mind, there are 2 categories of poetry as witness. One is the person who is really in the middle of all of it and is affected, is a victim of whatever is happening. So poets like Mahmoud Darwish, who wrote from Palestine, and Amiri Baraka, who's one of the leading Black poets, or somebody like Namdev Dhasal, a leading, Dalit poet of the Dalit movement. They come to mind because they are actually facing or struggling or fighting those kinds of oppressive environments that they're writing about. And the other category of poetry as witness is the bystander or the outsider, who is not really a victim per se, but is also moved empathetically enough to write about it, to not merely remain a bystander, but to chronicle, as Preeti mentioned, and make sure that it's not missed, because even to just chronicle is an important act, in my opinion. That is to say that, I am not just witnessing, but I'm making sure that I'm recording what I'm witnessing. So I think those are the thoughts that I had when this theme presented itself to me, and I've learned a lot from poet activists like Mahmoud Darwish, who kind of blend the artistic and the aesthetic excellently with the actual, with the factual scenarios that are unfolding. So I think it's a bright open sky, this space of being poetry as witness, whether you are a victim of the circumstances or not. This presents a lot of room and a lot of scope to explore.
Thank you, Bhashwati. Over to you, Kashiana, now.
I kind of stated a lot at the beginning, but I'll probably just add one thing, taking on from what Bhashwati said, which is through the poem, we become both learners and seekers of experiences, and those experiences need not be ours, right? To your point, Bhashwati, you're observing and you're witnessing or actively, right, documenting. The connection therefore becomes universal by driving poetry to become accessible, right? And your example of Mahmoud Darwish or the others goes there too. I'll probably just leave a thought about, okay, so what are the pitfalls of poetry as witness, or taking on this mantle of poetry as witness? And we won't have the time to go into all of that, but we know typically, like tokenism, we can be observers, and we can want to document experience and have the empathetic response to what Bhashwati said, but we also have to be watchful of tokenism, things like appropriation. And I almost hesitate bringing up that word because that's both abused and much used terminology in today's environment. But I think those are also elements to keep in mind. And it all goes back to the credibility and the sincerity of the lived experience and the observed experience, and how you balance that in your poetry.
Thank you. I have always felt that a writer is somehow a creature of paradox, because in order to write, a writer has to be more emotionally engaged than the average person. And yet, as my favorite writer, Graham Greene, or Gulzar, said, that a writer is born with a splinter of ice in the heart, because even as he or she is experiencing or witnesses something, it is also being recorded and stored for future use or reference, which makes me think of a writer or a poet too as a witness. What do you think about this? How do you witness the ideation of a poem? Do you feel an idea stealthily creeping into the mind, words streaming through your head? And what is special about the events that you draw onto the paper? How do you choose about what to write and what not to write? So again, this is for all of you. Anyone who wants to begin?
Yes, so I think for me, poetry always begs me to be written. I don't think about what I have to write. It's always there knocking at my mind, at my heart. It's urging me, it's beseeching me, ke mainu likho. Please write. So this means it has to be something so strong that I have felt that it has made that place in my mind and thoughts and heart that I want to write about it. So for me, the idea will come, mainu lagta jive anhad naad, like it's an ilham that comes down to me, right? It's pretty divine as far as I'm concerned. And I mostly write during the Amrit Vela, the early morning. So when I wrote, you have mentioned in your note that Gayatri and I both chose the partition to write about. So I was listening to the person who was in the midst of it, my mother-in-law, while we're doing the tadka thing in the kitchen, and she's narrating to me how she as a young bride is running through, with her little children in her arms. So it gives me goose pimples now too. So I've written so much about the partition that it was so natural that my poetry also talks about it. And how later when we saw the rape happening and all of that, so the ideas ask to be written. So are we going to be reading now or later?
No, later on. Once everyone is done with this question, we'll come down to individual poets and poetry. So your idea about a poet as a witness is something like what Ghalib said, or let's say what Wordsworth said. आते हैं गैब से ये ख्याल मज़ामी नेक, गालिब सरीरे खामा नवाए सरोश है.
बहुत बढ़िया,
और
एग्जैक्टली माय थॉट यही है।
Yeah.
वो खुद ही कहते हैं, वो कहते हैं कि इल्तिजा करते हैं कि सुनिए हमें लिख डालिए।
Poon, over to you. How do you view
Was that for me? Gurpratap?
yeah, that's for you.
It lost your voice. Okay, all right. See, I am primarily a fiction writer. So for me, poetry comes here and there. And there are experiences that are more abstract. And I feel that they take on more, they take on better in the form of a poem. And there's not a whole lot of planning that goes into it. It happens of its own accord. It's spontaneous.
It's spontaneous, like
But,
Wordsworth's overflow of emotions, I guess.
But it's not that, it's just the last word you record, but because I do tend to go back to my poems and rewrite them, just like I go back to my fiction and rewrite it. I happen to rewrite it every time I revisit it. So that's my experience.
Thank you. Thank you. Bhashwati?
Yes, I think I also agree with Lily on the Aate Hain Gap Se part. It comes a bit spontaneously, but also agree with Sakun. I'm not primarily a poet. I'm still very, very hesitant to call myself that. I do write poems, but I do sometimes need triggers. I will admit I need prompts to trigger into my consciousness a memory. Or something I have witnessed to be able to write the poem. So it is, I think, a combination of both. The memory itself is spontaneous, but sometimes I do need that nudge or that prompt to write it.
Thank you. Kashiana?
Yeah, I agree with everything everybody said, and I think we're all creatures of compulsion when it comes to writing, but there is, when we talk about the muse, right, and in my case, at least, as I analyze myself more and more, right, as you grow gray, you kind of do more self-evaluation on why do I really write and where does the inspiration come from. I've summarized to say, I stressed it earlier, there is something about the lived experience, and the lived experience could be my own, or it could be, like Lily said, listening and organically imbibing others' experiences. That's one. And the second category is when you don't want to forget, when you feel compelled, either because of your ethical, moral, or poetic responsibility, to say, I'm going to do something that prevents myself and probably whoever I can influence from forgetting. And that's driven by triggers or events, right, or situations, like Bhashwati said. And I happen to be an editor with a journal called Poets Reading the News, which is centered around the news and what that results in terms of poetry, and how poetry actually can be a journalistic tradition as well, picking up elements of the news. So that's where I would go, Gurpratap.
Thank you. Thank you. Gayatri?
So sometimes it's an image or a word, but it's definitely, I don't sit to write a poem, and I'm not a poet that needs a serene environment to sit and write. I learned that about myself. I didn't I think poetry teaches you a lot about yourself, and I learned that, I write best when I'm stressed, when I know I have to. I just, that is when the words will just come, there'll probably be a word and an image, and then I let it take its own journey. I let the poem take me where it has to take me. And that's how I work. And so it's quite, there'll be an image, or there'll be a place that I visit and it's so beautiful, or there's this Lake Placid that we visited. It was so beautiful. And I couldn't write anything about it. I just couldn't. It was too overwhelming. But when I got back home and the TV was on, the blaring music was on, my daughter was there, but then all that stress, that's when I just sat down and that's when I started writing. So that's how it works for me personally.
Thank you. These are all excellent thoughts and very unexpected also, because one would have thought one requires solitude and quiet in order to compose a poem, but there you go. You have the blade of TV as the trigger for a poem. All right. So now we'll come to the individual questions followed by the readings of the poems. And Kashiana, I would like to begin with you. While I was reading your poems from Woman by the Door, I felt that there's a sense of lingering wistfulness about all of them. Seeped in nostalgia as in Homesick, My Favorite Scenes, or Laika, Your Brother's Dog, they are redolent with smells and tastes and sounds and sights. Is it an attempt to relive and recreate the childhood, or are you trying to bring alive your experiences and to preserve them for posterity?
Thank you. And thank you for looking at the book, Woman by the Door. It's always encouraging when a poet learns that somebody actually picked up the book and looked at it. So thank you. Usually we write and then we think we are going to have it on our own bookshelves, right? But yes, I would say all of the above, and I would connect it back to what I said in the prior. It's against forgetting, right? It's trying to document for myself and others around me and ensuring we don't forget. There are poems about childhood. The book's divided into 4 sections, as you would have noticed, and it goes into there is actually a section that draws from memory and childhood, and there are poems of memory and grandparents and parents and kitchens, a lot of kitchen scenes, a lot of like smells, and also visceral. I write from the body. There are poems about the body. This book is really a book of transition, as the title suggests, right? It's Woman at the Door. So there is literally 3 spaces. There's the threshold, or the dehliz, as you would call it, and then there's the actual woman, and then there's a space inside and outside. And the poems keep moving in and out of those spaces, which then go back to your point about, yes, there's a question of childhood, but there's also a question of what's happening in the current environment around us. There are some political poems, there are poems about the pandemic, but all finally collecting into what transition is about. And I'll summarize by saying it's also just the woman itself, right? As all of us women panelists on this discussion, we are constantly in transition, right? We are moving in and out of roles. We are moving in and out of cities that we carry within us. And we are also moving in and out of just our own body and its transition, right? So all of that kind of came into what became Woman by the Door, Gurpratap.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you read couplets to spare?
Yeah, I can, and that is not from Woman by the Door.
I know, it is not. It is not.
which is fine. It actually is very relevant in terms of what we are talking about, poetry as witness. So I will read couplets to spare, and it's a lot of us probably part of the anthology Witness that came out last year, I think, and it really was focused on poetry of dissent, so to say, which is, I think, a subset of poetry as witness, right? Witness is way broader than just dissent. It isn't always about dissent. So I'll read the poem and happy to take questions. It's called Couplets to Spare. And so it's couplets. Here's how it goes. A sky is split, shards that scatter into suspended mouths. A border is sold, pimped for arguments precariously loud. A sun is eclipsed, colonized now by piercing bullet wounds. A song is shattered, countries vulnerable on broken spines. A battlefield is lost, choked to slogans of desperate bargains. A question is unsettled, cages are broken for a brilliance inside. A body is remnant. A body is remnant, molds a resting place before the tender grave, a map is fragmented, clings to the edges of falling peninsulas. A sea is collapsed into heavens that reflect a recoiling gaze. A sigh is heaved as a trespassing people scoop resilience in earth. A sunset is paraded across a fishnet of skulls over orange skies. A ground is stained. Bystanders watch others as they are numbed to shame. A monsoon is wounded, cajoling night to be sanctuary to its morning. A prayer is forgotten, written into notebooks inside carved temple doors. A family is sustained, stubborn as it walks miles into determined distance. A courage is obsolete, afflicted by sickness of history, so insolent. A nation is endangered, shriveled in wombs that walk into impregnable hours. A fist is closed, filled with bones and flesh, and couplets to spare. Couplets to spare.
Very nice. Very nice. Excellent.
Thank you. Some of those, as probably was obvious, came from the pictures and the images of the refugee crisis just at the peak of pandemic, but there are other influences driving the couplets.
In spite of all,
Yeah.
connection seems to be a little unstable. So sometimes
Yeah.
the screen freezes and I'm not, or someone else's
So
problem.
what I would
because of that.
suggest you, Gurpratap, to just turn off your camera. You'll be
Okay.
better. Yeah, just turn off your camera. Your bandwidth would be better.
So you want to say that I'm better heard and seen?
Well, at least we'll be able to hear you.
Audio clear otherwise.
Yeah.
So, this quite in Women by the Door. It is astonishing, like split, eclipsed, shattered, lost. They all add to the gloom. What inspired you to write this particular poem? What were you witness to, apart from the pandemic that you mentioned? You'll have to unmute yourself, Kashiana.
Sorry,
Kashiana,
I'm
Yeah.
I'm unmuted now.
Yeah.
Gurpratap, you hit, and like I said, right, there is obviously that we spoke about triggers, and the trigger was the refugee crisis that happened, and the pictures and the stories and the narratives around that was the trigger. But then obviously it expanded into the other political environment and situations that we were seeing both within my country of birth, which is India, but also where I live, which is the United States. So a combination of both those things led to that particular set of couplets. And once it started coming, then like Gayatri said and Lily said, it kept pouring out. And of course, my process is also very keen on the actual reworking and the editing. I mean, the poem lands on the page, but it's not the ultimate poem, right? Till you spend a lot of time pruning it and reworking it as well.
And now I would like to go to Bhashwati Ghosh. Bhashwati, your poems are full of haunting and startling images of isolation and nation. Click on.
Hello, are you done? Good, Pratap. I couldn't catch.
Gurpratap,
Yeah,
I
I
think
think-
you have to change your either be on your phone or something so everyone can hear.
I'll
So,
just
Bhashwati, yes. Please, you can start with your poetry and then we can discuss.
Okay, so
Or
I'll
maybe
speak.
Bhashwati, I'll make a point till then because till he comes back. Okay. So
Sure, sure.
basically, no, just as one stopgap thing, but everything that you all are speaking about also just brings this to mind. I'm no poet or anything anyway, but it just shows me like how close what you're saying. So whether it's poetry or even fiction, but how close that actually becomes to people who write either in the news or read the news, as you know, Kashyana, you mentioned something. And I remember like when we were working in the Northeast, for example, in many of those states, Nagaland, Mizoram, a lot of the reports that we were writing was so close to the kind of fiction that was coming out. Like sentence for sentence is the same. So what you could hear in interviews would be very much the same as what you were reading in a book, you know, in a fiction form. It's just a point. I mean, it's not to say it's not a question, but it's quite amazing what you're saying, that the poetry or the fiction comes so close to actual report writing, which is fact or supposed to be fact.
Right.
So
that's a great observation, right? Because like, and that connects, Preeti, to what I was saying about what we see as I sit on the other side of the table in this journal, right? Poets reading the news, and what comes from the writers is very often reporting, right? To your point. And then of course, there's the process of editing and actually looking at poetic elements to turn it into poetry.
Gurpratap, if you're back, then you can take over.
I think I'm back.
Yeah,
You
we
tell me
can
if
hear
I'm
you.
back. Okay. So maybe I'm on the phone actually now.
But you can put, yeah, fine. That's good. Yeah.
Okay. So if this is good enough, I'll continue. So Bhashwari, my question was with reference to the poem that I read, Sunset on the Malecon. And I felt that your poem was full of haunting and startling images of desolation and passive resignation. Everything, it seems, is going to seed. Why this sense of despair? And yet you offset this sense of despair with a sense of hope also. Can you talk about this?
Yes. So this poem, Sunset on the Malecon, it was inspired by a visit that we had to Cuba, and specifically Havana, the capital of Cuba, a few years ago. And, you know, just as a lighter aside, Havana is a very popular destination with Canadians because, to quote a colleague, you know, there is a lot of sun and no Americans. So when we took, when we made that trip, it was with a lot of expectations because you grew up, you know, listening to or reading about stories about the revolution, about Fidel Castro and about Che Guevara and so on. So we went with a whole lot of expectations, but Cuba is struggling, you know, ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union. It has been on a very downhill economic financial journey. It's still facing the embargo that the US put on it through decades. And yet, you know, while it's struggling on the one hand, there are telltale signs of that kind of struggle everywhere. Everything seems to be gasping, you know, taking its final breaths or so on. And yet, on the other hand, you see children going to school. You don't see any child who is working at a shop or is, you know, being used for labor. You see very happy children, including girls, which gave me so much hope. And you see the people have so much of spirit still left in them. And one of the pivotal things that kind of holds the people of Havana is the sunset, which happens on the Malecon, which is, you know, overlooking the sea. And they gather there, they congregate there every evening in large numbers. There's not a lot going on in Cuba in terms of entertainment. You know, internet is patchy. They don't have access to a lot of the things that we take for granted, you know, Netflix and Amazon Prime and so on. So they actually do real life things. Children actually are seen playing soccer on the streets. People go to watch the sunset. There are fewer people just looking at their screen. So this poem was inspired by that. And, you know, as Kashyana mentioned earlier, it captures both the sunrise of the revolution, which is, you know, alludes to the revolution. So, you know, in one part, in the first half of the poem, I do refer to the morning that arrived many suns ago ducked out. So, that is now a thing of the past. It is still romanticized by many, but in reality, people are struggling. But then in the second half, I speak about the sunset and how, even after the despair and the frustrations of the day, people still find some glory that they can hold on to. And that is the sunset on the Malecon. So that dichotomy, that push and pull that people are going through in Cuba right now, it's a country in transition because the Castros have left. They are trying to open up more and more to the world economy. They're trying tourism as a way to keep afloat. So it's very much a country in transition. The young there are very aspirational. So this poem is a small attempt to understand more than anything else, that push and pull, let's say.
After that wonderful background to the poem, we shall be delighted if you could read the poem to us also.
Yeah, sure. So here's how it goes. Sunset on the Malecon. On this island, where the air sweat lugs smoke, decrepitude, and promises long forgotten, only sunsets still keep their word. Cars once shiny, wrecks now, tire the streets. On balconies, old men mask sighs with cigarette smoke and loud confabs. The morning that arrived many suns ago ducked out, like friends whose empires collapsed overnight. When the day ends and mean employers are left behind, when rationed bread, wilting cabbage, and blackening bananas are brought home, this city, sweltry, desultory, heads to the ocean for that mysterious moment. The sun, an upset queen, turns crimson and threatens, like everyone else, to leave. Fathers and sons, lonely mothers, weary lovers, drink the liquid fire, predictable and illusory, like the country they were taught to love.
This is simply beautiful, and it's a very, very visual poem. When you talk about masked men standing on balconies and having a smoke and indulging in loud confabs, you actually see an image forming in your mind through those words. And the phrases that you use, cars once shiny, wrecks now, tire the streets, wilting cabbage, blackening bananas. Yet these are very unusual and apt images of everything headed towards ruin and rot. How do these images come to you? And how do you offset the sense of despair with the sense of hope?
So these images are, raw images that I actually witnessed. So everything that you refer to as visual is exactly that. We stayed in an Airbnb where, it was being run by a young couple. And every afternoon, their father would just sit on the balcony, and he was incapable of going to the shore and watch the sunset for himself. He had severe arthritis, so he was pretty much homebound. But he would just sit on the balcony and watch the goings on the street below. There would be a group of young men sometimes singing loudly, or people just going about their business. And every afternoon, this old man would just sit on the balcony, and he would invite my husband for a chat. And my husband had a very broken knowledge of Spanish, and somehow they would be able to, have a conversation of some sort. So it was taken from what I observed. And if you visited any of the fruit or vegetable markets, again, the sight was quite depressing. There was very little that we saw by way of fresh fruits and vegetables. It's very hot and humid there. Things go bad very quickly. Refrigeration is not of the standards that it is in the West and elsewhere. So all these are very real images that I actually saw. Bread is rationed, so you have to actually go every evening and bring bread. That is kind of, that's your quota that you get. So these images, kind of gave us an idea of what people are actually going through, where we take all of this for granted in our everyday lives. And yet, when I visited this Malecon for the sunset, that's when I saw that there was still so much of hope. They were singing, groups of people were singing with their guitars and instruments, and a father had come with his young child to show him the sunset. There were lovers. They all made time to come for this one moment, one transitory moment that probably still inspires some hope. So yes, the poem has a lot of desolation, which is what the ground situation looked like to me. And yet I saw that, there was an attempt to redeem some glory out of it through sunset, and which also is, for me, it's a metaphor for the kind of resilience that Cuba itself has shown. Because a country is not made of its leaders or its politicians, really. It's made of its people. It's made of those who are going through all of this on a daily basis, and yet finding something that can bring hope to them. So I think that's probably what was on my mind when I wrote this.
Thank you. Thank you. Sakun, my next question is for you. Sakun?
Yeah, I can hear you, Gurpratap.
Yeah. So my next question is coming your way. Your poems are intensely personal, and yet the emotions are universal. You talk about the genesis of love, falling in love, being in love, and then the inevitable falling out of love. Do you see love as a process that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, as this trilogy of your poems suggests?
Yes, Gurpratap, these three poems were conceived of as a set. So it's best to read them together.
All right.
And even though they are lyrics, there is a certain narrative out there, like you quite rightly pointed at that. There is a kind of evolution happening there. And these are intensely personal. And when I put my fiction next to my poetry, in fact, poetry is what really I get into when, there are experiences that are intensely personal, which neither my fiction takes up nor my academic writing takes up. So I think these are set of those three poems where I talk of an intensely personal experience. The first poem about a trial room confession is something that was triggered by a real life experience. And I think it happens with everybody. It's a very common experience. It's nothing very extraordinary when, you walk into a trial room and you have these mirrors next to each other, and sometimes you see continuum of images. And it's just that one moment. I felt how the way, this continuum of images, or the replication of images, and how, in a way, that replication, kind of sounds me to a truth, which is a confession of love here. So do I go ahead and read this poem?
Yes, please. They are absolutely brilliant. Please.
So what I'll do is I'll read them all three in a go, because, they are written like that.
All right.
So the first is trial room confessions. In a trial room of a garment store, I look at my body clothes. In a stranger mirror that will not lie. Unlike the friendlier one in the bedroom and the mischievous one peeping out from the camera, this one here will bear some truths that I have hitherto denied. And I just want to make a point here before I go ahead about Bhaswati's poem, which I intensely enjoyed and immensely enjoyed. I think sometimes it needs a stranger's eyes to see the truth, you know, more than people who are in that experience. And I think some things you could see more clearly and crystal clearly about Cuba that perhaps people there could not see. You know, sometimes a stranger eye gives you that clarity that years of familiarity clouds over. So here is that one moment also where one is kind of, you know, sounded to that experience or that truth. It turns out it's a room paneled with mirrors, where in the shallow silence, each mirror reflects not my, but your face. A trick, a continuum of your million faces, retreating into an unending column. You're there till my eyes can see. Do you see? Thoughts of you sharpen into focus, while the list of quotidian things to do will have to wait till another day. Things once exciting have lost their allure. What shines in my heart like a burnished jewel all day long is the thought of you. My heart does a quiet somersault at the knowledge of this little secret that the heart protectively scaffolds with the sinewy walls of loud beatings. Do you hear? So that is one. Second is, how does one fall out of love? When it is certain, established beyond doubt, when you know the last time is indeed the last, how do you then go about falling out of love? It is onerous. Do not underestimate. Falling in does not take the effort of falling out. For falling in was effortless, mostly in ignorance, beginning in a harmless exchange, and in the comfort of hindsight, the realization that the inevitable had happened. It had grown overnight, away from watchful eyes, like a cabbage in a spring vegetable garden. In silence and in darkness, a pale flower morphed into leafy, glistening fruit, weighty and substantial. But falling out is tortuous. The days you had allowed yourself the willful abeyance of reason, the fantasy of sensual longing, imagination running riot. These are your arch enemies now. You got to watch out. Alert like a sniper waiting with a weapon. Should you find these entities, raise their heads from behind mortared walls, take an aim and raise them to the ground. Before you follow them unknowingly into these heartbreaking alleys, one time, a million times, in a fit of oblivion, in a moment of forgetfulness, every day, every minute, you got to watch out. You have to desist from taking a walk that side of the town. And one fine day, even this resolve will disappear. You will not want to fight it. This urgency will have died, those pangs diffused like sap in the cells. Love will have spread itself like a sediment in your body. And the third is you, just like that, not completely, but in such a way that I will occur to you in flashes, now and there, here and there. A longing won't torment you every walking hour. I will be but an occasional ache, triggered by a smell or a sight. A feverish expectation will not gnaw at your innards. An endless, wretched weight will not steal all your hours. A ticking fear of abandonment will not eat you from inside. A vision of me entwining with you will not overwhelm you on rainy evenings. One day you will forget me in this way. I will only occur to you in flashes, now and then, here and there. So those are the three.
These are absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
You know, in the trial room confessions, the sense of confinement, of being completely immersed in love at all times, is brilliantly brought out through the mirrors and the trial room. And the process of falling in love is so innocuous. It just happens. Beginning in a harmless exchange, grown overnight away from watchful eyes like a cabbage. How did this particular thought come to you?
It'll be very hard to point it out. I think it's all that we keep absorbing, and at times, it is just a metaphor which shows itself and kind of fits in perfectly with the thought. So I would give so much to serendipity. I would give so much to what all you keep absorbing, what all you keep reading, so that, words and images and thoughts fit together in the way they do.
And here's something on a lighter note. Interestingly, cabbage features in yours and Bhashpati's poem.
Yes.
What's with cabbages?
I was thinking the same thing. What's with cabbages, guys?
What's with cabbages? Yes. I can assure you we didn't consult.
and they're used in entirely with entirely different meanings.
Totally, yeah.
And it's interesting, it's not mushroomed, it's cabbage. So that's how things happen, I guess, in poetry. So I'll turn to Lily, you now. You bring alive the violent horror of a devastating event like the partition, just as you spoke now, and how it affects the common man. The reduction of a man to pure evil and to utter helplessness is so brilliantly evoked and it's so affecting. Why did you choose to write about the partition, and how did you imagine all this devastation, the fear, the hate, the power? Because the poem has a very strong sense of personal experience and immediacy.
Who is this for? For
You,
it's for
Lily?
me?
Yeah.
Yes. I think, Guru Pratap, we are the generation who heard it from the horse's mouth, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
Like my dad tells me, he was in his metric and he had gone up to fix the fuse while the Tonga was standing there and they were all set to go to what is now India. And the clip clop of the Tonga, he told it so vividly to me, this young boy, who he was then, and how my mother-in-law explained it to me, that the fear was real to me. So my poems, I think, are trying to understand the anatomy of that fear, because fear has shades, fear has layers, fear has many faces, it has many echoes. So I was trying to pinpoint that fear because she had a big kund, a ghungat, a veil. Her father-in-law, with whom she was running with 2 little children, had never seen her face. Her husband was what is in India now, in Shimla, and they were running from what is now Pakistan, trying to catch a train. And she said, I was horrified that I would get lost in that crowd because my father-in-law had never seen my face. So he, it seems, came up to her and said, Puttar kund chukle. And she says, she's told me that there was a secret between my father-in-law and me. And when we reached Firozpur, he said, Puttar kund pala. So the fear which she narrated to me was so real and vivid, it had to be penned down for me. You're right. It was almost as if I was there. So that's how it translates into my poetry. Yes.
We shall be delighted if you could read the 2 poems that you sent me. Her sister, his sister's scarf and Fear Has a Voice.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start reading Fear Has a Voice with Many Echoes. The jingling of the door, creaking pathetically on its hinges, wailing over that distraught summer, wriggling on its arthritic ankles, pulling up its sagging soul, her spirit cowering under bales of cotton wool, breathing through lungs that were waiting to burst open with the labored pains. When countries divide, there are lines drawn on paper in plush offices amidst pompous chatter. When hearts separate, there is no sound audible to human ears, just a vivisection of limbs torn into shreds by emotional shrapnel, piercing eardrums of the heart with manic screeches, clinging and cringing in alleys, knowing it was your turn next to be mutilated, maimed, raped, killed, who knew? Partitions of nations have octopus tentacle-like backfires, red dupattas, of young widows merging with their crimson blood. Pre-teen girls shell-shocked after the brutality of self-appointed gangs of wise men. Toddler orphans clutching to the ends of their dead mothers' veils, howling like wolf cubs, baying to the moon. Yes, fear has a voice with many echoes. A spear is carved through bleeding hearts. Fear stinks up the balmy summer with shrieks of 1947. Fear smokes up a foul fog of horrific backlashes. Fear masquerades as a grinning clown and roams freely around us, ever watchful, always on guard, ready to sprint off any moment to hide under the wounded haystack. Fear has many echoes.
Excellent. I'm just speechless. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, seriously.
And once again, these are very, very haunting and very visual images.
Yes. So his sister's scarf is the other one. And that was triggered by the refugee children and orphans. I've been an army wife most of my life, and I have encountered these images and visuals in reality. So I'll quickly read that. Aloft the banners of victorious nations floats a tousled head. Buried under the yoke of olive green, the screeches of a million corpses renting the air in desperation. The head of an 8-year-old who lived to tell this tale of horrors, the vivisection of human dignity, the rape of innocent childhood. His terrified sister's scarf clutched tightly in his clenched fist, wailing in disbelief as her clothes were ripped off her waif-like frame. The helpless, beseeching face of his now hunchbacked father, the man who once carried him high on his shoulders, begging for mercy on his knees. The trauma of seeing this he-man, his idol, brutally beaten to a pulp. The curettage of humanity, drop by drop. His mother, cowering beneath her dead husband's bleeding body. They kicked her out of the room, dragging her by her hair, calling her derogatory names, drunk with vicious rage. They had to run from this pack of hyenas, for their land was not theirs anymore. It was the ghetto of murder and mayhem. They were refugees from friends that turned foes. The unkindest cut of all, the curse on the country they fled to, the uprooted banyan trees trailing their branches, the scars that tarnished the soil, that gave refuge. Who gives another human the right to disfigure and handicap? Oh, let me take my toy train. Please remember to water my rose bush. Give me my sister's doll's house. Let me hug the neighbor's daughter. Mama said I would marry her when I grew up. Beware the wrath of God, O ye creators of refugees, for nowhere will you get any refuge after the curse of weeping souls. Thank you.
You know, the problem is I'm holding the phone in my hand and I can't clap, you know, but let me give you a thumbs up. That was excellent. Simply excellent.
Thank you.
Very moving also, very moving.
Thank you.
So I move on to Gayatri Chawla. I read Leaving Synth, and it is a really affecting poem. It is about loss and homelessness and lasting bewilderment. There is a sense of deep and quiet anguish in the poem. Can you share with us the personal human factor behind this poem?
Yeah. Thank you, Guru Pratap, for that intrinsic reading of my poem. So a little background about my poem. My poem is called Leaving Synth. And my father was born in a small village called Manju in a place called Gadi Khata. And this is in undivided India. And after a few years, the family moved to Karachi. And during the partition of 1947, my father, along with my ancestors, they migrated to Indian shores. I think it was that one night that the entire family got into a steamer boat and they migrated. Along with that pots and pans and furniture, they also carried nostalgia, as I said before, for motherland that they never visited again. So Leaving Sindh is about that particular moment. And it's about that time when they left, that night basically, when they left Sindh. And should I read it?
Yeah, please, please.
Leaving Sindh. Occasionally, I feel the loss of place, of inheritance, of a homeland. Not because my grandfather said it or my father felt it, just a needling sensation, a homeland of my own. Every day a taste of its savories in the rich wheat grain cookies mother packs in my Milton lunchbox. Baked papads made of gram dal in a see-through plastic bag. She packs these two. One doesn't go without the other. Tonight, I look at mother's hands, pounding the marble, mortar and pestle, crushing pods of garlic. Her eyes have stolen. She hasn't slept a wink last night, grinding her dream with mortar and pestle. I wonder how it would feel to leave behind Jamshed quarters, the window overlooking the Sindhu, the white sheets left unfolded on a bed undone, wardrobes stripped of its identities, suitcases filled with pangs of insecurity, pretending it would get better. I wonder how it would feel to be homeless. Occasionally, I feel like an island, an unnoticed speck, a lost postcard with no address, sitting in the post office with a stamp reading Undivided India. Thank you.
This is beautiful, beautiful. You know, your usage of words, your felicity for using unusual phrases, grinding her dreams with mortar and pestle, suitcases filled with pangs of insecurity, a lost postcard. These are also beautiful yet sad images. I believe you have dedicated this poem to your father. Have you tried to experience what he and your mother felt as they were leaving Sindh? Or is it more of a personal experience, the needling sensation, the sense of isolation, or feeling like an island, like you said in the poem?
So, my father was a young boy when he migrated to India. And, this feeling of course, much later is when we really realized that, oh, we are, we have a motherland. There is Sindh, there is a state called Sindh, just across the border. And that's when, finally, I remember in school, people would say, oh, we are going to our native place. And I came home and I said, Papa, why are we not going? Where is the native place? He said, this is your native place now. This Mumbai is your home now. And that's when I felt, why don't I have a native place, And also, of course, when you don't have a state, then a lot of other things get kind of lost, your culture, your language, because when we came to the Indian shores, of course, they came up with, there was absolutely so much of economic instability, My father would tell me that they would stand, they would go to these refugee camps and they would stand in queue for bread and milk. And I would just listen to him, and it's, that I cannot forget that image of what he has told me. And also, he didn't know Hindi, neither Marathi. He knew Farsi and Sindhi. So again, that was a big, huge, so coming to a place and then that feeling of being displaced, that always is there, it always remains. So that is what I think as I told you, we didn't speak about in that mean, but there were incidences like this. He would tell us stories. So then I picked that, and I think that has come out in my writing.
Thank you. Thank you. I have lots of more questions, but looking at the time, I think we had just left with 10 minutes of a meeting. I wanted to ask you some questions about relevance of poetry as witness and your contemporary favorite poets. But instead of that, I think I would like to go with another reading of one of your poems.
Sure.
So that let's begin with poetry, let's end with poetry instead of going into questions and answers.
So should I read Well, Leaving Sindh was written in a good 7 years back. And this is a poem that I'm going to read called Sindh, which is just written last year. And so I'll just read this. And I wanted to just say that, I don't know why we keep, why there are these man-made borders, because sometimes I feel I wish we were just birds, because, panchiyon ko passport ki zarurat nahi hoti. So I just feel that is one thought. Sindh. Sachal rests in the cobalt blueness of the walls of Daraza. The city he never left holds his shrine in her folded hands, seeking the divine. Sachal breathes in the sienna brown lotus stem fritters, sold door to door by the weary vendor, wrapped in withered paper, time-warped aftertaste. Drink from the chalice of love, intoxicated in the ebb of separation. He comes alive in the folktales of Moomal and Rano, sung by Amma, sitting on a charpoy, smoking ferociously from a brass hookah. She's 94 now, quilting an ajrak mattress, inherited from the ancestors of her ancestors, umbilically connected to the land and its people. Sindh, the land of Sufi saints, brazen and stark, a contagion of faith, bellwether of nostalgia. Raise your hands to the Lord in the sky above. Oneness is contagious and resides here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Kashyana, I believe you too have a poem about the partition.
I do. Do you want me to go there?
Yeah, of course.
All right. I will pull it up. 1 second. And this is from my first book, Shelling Peanuts and Stringing Words, and the poem's called Mangroves. It'll speak for itself. I don't think context is needed after all the discussion we've had. Mangroves. Act 1. I set out once looking for mangroves with haunted stories about the withered woman with feet that turned inwards. The mangroves with secret spells hovering over lampposts. The mangroves where boys scuffled and where men gathered to grope for survival. The mangroves that displaced the rotten smell of burning flesh as each canopy collapsed into an Asian pile. Act 2. I waited. I waited to enter the looming arch of the house that echoed my mother's desires in entombed gold and treasures, the house that watched, silent, the gates that creaked, each howling ground, recollecting a plea, wretchedness of bruised bodies and naked shadows still lingering behind its walls. Act 3. I walked. I walked the platform again, chugging wheels that recited memories of trains moving like ghosts between places, transporting phantoms. The platform I walked again covered me in soot of butchered history. I lifted some soil, some scars, some sketches. Act 4. I opened the tall gates and entered against my will into the portico to my beginnings. I swaddled myself with the elegance of my mother, the industriousness of my father, the grit of my brothers, the sacrifice of my sisters, the flawlessness of their songs as they chanted, possessed to their dead and their crippled and their humiliated and their young and newborn and unborn. Act 5. I bow in thankfulness and accept the warm tea served by the house lady on the veranda. I get goosebumps reading it, but this was my father's journey, if you didn't catch it, back to his lost home in Pakistan after many, many years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Talking about the partition and having all these poems about the partition and how it affected the country and the people, it is almost like a prelude to the festival that is coming up in August by Majha House. we are having a wonderful session, and we are going to talk about the 75 years of independence and where we are and where we were and where we were supposed to be. So, Bhashwati, can you read another poem for us?
Yes, sure. This is a short one, and this is also about bearing witness, but it's, bearing witness across geographies and situations. Probably you'll be able to catch some of them. It's called To Have Loved. What a beautiful thing it is to have loved. To stand next to a Japanese maple slowly dying and admire the burgundy stars shimmering on its branches in sunlight. To hold a father's unsteady hands as the breath ebbs out of him on an uncertain night. To dig through rubble, fresh and still warm from the bomb that fashioned it for your daughter's missing doll. To chat with your friend's granddaughter over WhatsApp, epistles of encrypted affection. To think of your daughter's face now in prison with a trembling heart and a colorless smile. What if you don't make it until she's freed? To let it go. Of a withering Japanese maple, your father's sentience, the head of your child's lost doll, the hope to see your daughter again. To have loved is to make peace with loss, even though to have loved is to know the insolence of desire. That's it.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent.
So I believe we have had at least 2 readings from each poet, and it's almost 7:27, and it's time to bid adieu. Although I would personally love to be with you and sit with you and have more readings of your wonderful poems. And I guess it's time for me to say thank you to each one of you for being with us on Majha House. And it was a wonderful, wonderful session. And it was really an amazing experience to listen to all your different and unique voices. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. It was
Bye-bye.
indeed,
Thank you
indeed,
for a
indeed.
great session, really.
Thank you for
I mean,
hosting.
all of you. And Guru Pratap, thank you very much for hosting it and moderating. Before I let everybody
it
go
was a
away,
pure
I just want
pleasure.
to, sorry?
It was a pleasure. It was right for me.
Yeah, it was really good. And also so many different voices. I mean, themes came out, but also those themes were expressed so differently by each of you that it sort of just makes that landscape and that whole thing so much larger for us to see. The beauty of not only the image, but the language that you use, the words that you use. They're really stunning. I just want to tell everybody who's here that our next online session is on the 30th of this month. And it's on a really fantastic, beautiful book of images. The book is called Splendors of Punjab Heritage, Art from the Khanuja Family Collection. It's a book published by Rowley, and it's got lots of everything that this family has been collecting down the years. So the author is going to be with us, Parvinder Jeet Singh Khanuja, and the conversation is going to be with Paul Taylor, who's from the Smithsonian Institute. We have the artist Arpana Kaur with us as well. We have the curator of the Lahore Fort, the Princess Bamba collection, Anjum Dara. And we have Harinder and Kirandeep Singh, who do this Mela Fulkari and also run 1469. And this session is being moderated by Alka Pandey, who is a well-known writer, curator, art historian. So do join us at 6:30 on the 30th. Anyway, the invitations will go out. Please do be here. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
It was indeed a pleasure. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.